We're recording. Thank you, Jeff. You can go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, good to see everybody here. It is exciting to talk to all of you today. As Grace said, my name is Jeff Gillman. I am director of the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Of course, we'd love to have you come down. We have 10 acres of outdoor gardens and just under 5,000 square feet under glass. So if you have a chance, we'd love to have you come visit. I'm very familiar with the Hahn Gardens up there, Virginia Tech, which is also a wonderful garden. You need to see as many as you can. That said, today I'm going to be talking about the truth about organic gardening. We are going to look at a lot of the good of organics. We're also going to take a look at a lot of the bad of organics. We like to look at both sides. What qualifies me to talk about organics? Well, I have my master's in entomology, University of Georgia. I have my Ph.D. in horticulture from the University of Georgia. I have 15 years of research experience as a professor at the University of Minnesota, and I've been running the gardens here for 10 years. So I've been doing this kind of stuff a while. I'm also the author of The Truth About Organic Gardening and The Truth About Garden Remedies, and a few other books as well. I'm also an editor of Fine Gardening magazine. So I've been around the gardening world a lot. I've tried a lot of these organic things firsthand. In fact, basically everything that I'm going to show you today, I have used and tried mostly for research, but sometimes just to give it a shot. With that said, off we go. Let me make sure that I'm able to share this well. Can never tell. Right? Boom, boom. Let me hit that. Grace, let me ask you real quick. Are you able to see that? That's a thumbs up. So off we go. The Truth About Organic Gardening, Jeff Gillman. So before we understand organics, you've got to understand where organics came from. And let me tell you something, organics weren't a thing until we had synthetics. What the heck is a synthetic? A synthetic is a man-made something, obviously. And what we're talking about here is man-made fertilizer. When do you think we started figuring out that adding more nutrients to the earth could result in more plant growth? Well, we've known that since Roman times, in fact, before Roman times. But in the modern era, we first learned that different elements were really effective at growing new plants around the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s. And the guy most responsible, there are a number of guys who did works on that, was Jean-Baptiste Boussingault. Jean-Baptiste Boussingault showed that, demonstrated that an increase in nitrogen through cow manure, or the best one, chicken manure or turkey manure, adding this stuff, and mostly the nitrogen, is really what caused plants to really kick up their growth. Okay? And once he figured out that adding this extra nitrogen helped plants to kick up their growth, what happened? Well, we had to find where we could get this kind of nitrogen. So we get the nitrogen from manure, but better yet, guano. What is guano? And you're all thinking, whoa, guano is just poop. No. Guano is not just poop. Guano is aged poop. And where do you find aged poop? Well, you can find aged poop in caves where bats go to the bathroom. But back in the 1800s, the best place to find aged poop was actually on the west coast of Peru. On the west coast of Peru, you had this really arid environment, and in this arid environment, seabird poop would build up and age, and it was really, really high in nitrogen. So what they would do is they would actually mine this guano, and when they mine this guano, they use it, of course, for fertilizer. But, you know, most people weren't actually interested in fertilizer. Humans being humans, what were they actually using the nitrogen for mostly? Well, to kill each other, of course, because nitrogen is the big ingredient in gunpowder. So, yes, your mind guano is used for fertilizer, but almost as importantly, it was used to make weapons. So here's the thing. They're mining guano in the 1800s to, to fuel war. And then what happened is that World War I came along, and World War I was not a war that people didn't see coming. We knew, that is, the world knew that World War I was going to happen. And because the world knew that World War I was going to happen, the countries involved knew that they'd have to get resources for the war. Germany knew that it needed to get nitrogen for its guns. And they knew that it was going to be tough to sail all the way around and get to Peru. They were going to be stopped. Somebody was going to stop them from getting to Peru. So they knew that they were going to have to get that nitrogen from somewhere besides the guano in Peru. Hence the Haber-Bosch process. And for all of you, the most important chemical reaction, perhaps in the history of mankind, is the Haber-Bosch process. This is the process by which nitrogen is taken from the air and fixed in a way that it can be made into either fertilizer or explosives. The Haber-Bosch process is the reason why there are so many people on the earth today, because this additional nitrogen taken from the air and made into fertilizer fueled human expansion. Okay, this is the big reaction. Nitrogen from the air plus natural gas, specifically hydrogen, plus high temperature and pressure, and you get ammonia. And that ammonia can then be made into, as master gardeners, you should know, your two forms of fertilizer, ammonium or nitrate. Okay, so Haber-Bosch process, huge. This, when people talk about synthetic fertilizers, they are talking about the Haber-Bosch process. Okay, I'm going to say that again because it's so important. When people are talking about synthetic fertilizers, they are talking about the Haber-Bosch process. Concentrated nitrogen. Okay, what happened? Well, we started using these salts, this synthetic fertilizer, right away, more or less. Haber-Bosch process came around in the early 19 teens, certainly used in World War I. After World War I, this was a big source of nitrogen for everybody. They put it into the fields. Now, you guys probably have heard about the Dust Bowl in the United States. The Dust Bowl, basically a time when dryness and high temperatures made portions of the Midwest into just a big dusty area. This was not just because of temperature and dryness. It was also because the ground for a couple of decades had been fertilized, instead of with manure or organic matter, it had been fertilized primarily with synthetic salts. These synthetic salts provided more concentrated nitrogen, but they did not help soil structure. And because they didn't help maintain soil structure, we ended up with a situation which was, it was going to be bad anyway, but it was much worse because we were adding these synthetic fertilizers, okay, instead of adding manure. Sir Albert Howard, this is the father of organic farming. He wrote a book, An Agricultural Testament, which talked about organics and how you really need to utilize organic material to build up the soil. An Agricultural Testament is one of the most boring books you'll ever read in your entire life. But having said that it's boring, it is also the centerpiece to organic theory in terms of organic growing things. And again, the idea, Sir Albert Howard's idea, he did most of his research in India and China, and he looked at the practices that they had in India and China of putting night soil and other manure back into the ground to build the soil, build up its amount of organic material, carbon-containing material, and by building that up, building a stronger long-term situation for plants to do well. Okay, so this is basically the beginning of organics. Now, here's the thing. Sir Albert Howard, once again, boring guy, his book, boring. Fortunately, and there's the heart of the organic garden, your organic material right there. Fortunately, there is Jerry Cohen, who you know better as J.I. Rodale. He's a person who changed his name because he thought Rodale was going to be much more marketable, and he was absolutely right. And he did great. The thing about J.I. Rodale is that he was not a scientist in any way, shape, or form, but he had read Howard's work, truly believed in it, and he made it palatable and attractive to the masses. And he could point to the Dust Bowl and say, hey, look what your regular agricultural does. We need to do things organically to build the soil. Of course, he also brought in a lot of other ideas. Sir Albert Howard was really just about the soil. J.I. Rodale talked about a lot of different things in a lot of different ways that we could make the world a better place. Some things that you may not know. He was a big proponent of eating raw apple seeds. He thought that this would make you a lot healthier. He was also a proponent of adding 1,000 pounds of regular salt per acre of celery so that you could make pre-salted celery. I kid you not. Read his book, The Organic Front. It is, this guy could write page turners. You might not agree with him, but he could write page turners. And in case you guys were wondering how he died, I know that's what you were thinking before this talk even started. How did J.I. Rodale die? Well, I'm going to tell you how he died. So J.I. Rodale was always out there, always pushing his ideas, always pushing organic. He got invited to one of the big talk shows of the early 1970s. You might have heard of the Dick Cavett Show. Most of you are young enough, you probably didn't see it. I have, but if you go on to the Dick Cavett Show, you know, you were a big name back in the early 1970s. So he was on the Dick Cavett Show. He was, let's see, he was born in 1899, so he would have been 72 on the Dick Cavett Show. And while he was up there, he was asked how old he was going to live to be, and he told them that he was going to live to be about 100 years old because of his incredible organic diet. He died on stage. No joke. Now, they did not air that show, but if you doubt me, look it up for yourself. And in fact, that's something that I always like to point out in any talk I give. I have 30 years experience, and I have a Ph.D., and I was a professor for 15 years. I'm currently the director of a botanical garden. So what? Don't believe everything that I say. Check everything. Find multiple sources. One of the silliest things that you can do is to believe everything that anybody says. That's how you got into this whole believing organic stuff in the first place. You need to, you should check everything that I say. You should check everything that anybody says. Don't just believe one source. It's only going to get you in trouble. So I welcome your disagreements. All right, that's it. Let's move on. So let's talk about organic fertilizers for just a minute. And I like to start with this slide because it actually shows mining of rock phosphate. Rock phosphate, of course, is an organic source of phosphorus. In fact, it's one of the big organic sources of phosphorus. Almost all of your phosphorus as rock phosphate comes from Florida. When it is mined, and it is strip mined just like this, when it is mined, one of the waste products is phosphogypsum. What is phosphogypsum? Well, it is radioactive waste. And in fact, once they strip mine like this land is considered a toxic radioactive site, and you can't even build on it. So now you know that when you mine these organic fertilizers, you actually may be promoting the spread of radioactive waste. Awesome. Also, I should point out that phosphorus and rock phosphate, this is being strip mined like this. This is not a renewable resource. And in fact, there are a few organic fertilizers that aren't renewable resources. Green sand, which is a source of potash, potassium, also mined, not a renewable resource. There are numerous organic fertilizers that aren't renewable. One that may surprise you is bat guano. You might think, well, bat guano, of course that's renewable. It's just bat poop. What did I tell you about guano before? Guano is aged poop. Most of you, now, I want to add a caveat here. If you're getting your bat guano from Texas, Texas actually has a really good record of caring for the caves that they mine the bat guano from. You're fine. Much of the bat guano that you get, though, is from the Caribbean, Jamaica, Indonesia. When they mine bat guano from those caves, they are not necessarily careful, and they actually destroy the life in those caves. They destroy the ecosystem. So this is not actually renewable when it's mined from those areas. This is actually destroying entire ecosystems. So be very, very careful about that. Guano is not necessarily a renewable resource. It is not like turkey manure, for example. Now, I thought that I'd show you, just for fun, there are a number of different fertilizers out there which utilize mixes of different products. And I thought I'd show you some of the things that could be in the mix. Up at the upper left, you've got Weed Prevention Plus. That's a pretty common fertilizer. Includes corn gluten meal, bone meal. Look, corn gluten meal and bone meal, these are renewable resources. We get them, well, corn gluten meal, that's actually a filler in cat food. So you find it everywhere, obviously renewable. Bone meal, you get that from your slaughterhouse. Potassium sulfate, I have that in yellow because potassium sulfate is mined, but there's so much of it in the world that, no, I guess it's technically not renewable, but at the same time, there's so much of it that it's not a big issue to me. But then let's look at this Peace of Mind Smart Organics fertilizer down here. Peace of Mind Smart Organics. What has it got? Well, it's got feather meal and bone meal, certainly renewable. It's got a few compounds that are mined, but we see them. Then it's got bat guano and rock phosphate. Not ecologically the best thing in the world to go after. And the bat guano, by the way, not from Texas, just so you know. So I'm sorry, but I don't consider that smart organics, and it does not give me any peace of mind. You might be different, and always remember that. These are your choices to make, not mine. But I'll always tell you my opinion because that's what I do. All right, so what kind of fertilizers do I like? I do like organic, and by organic, I mean natural and renewable. I really like cottonseed meal, alfalfa meal. I like blood meal too. I'll point out real quickly the cottonseed meal because that's one of my favorites. Reason I like cottonseed meal is because it's got relatively high nitrogen for an organic, for a natural product, and it has low phosphorus. Low phosphorus is a real key in most of your fertilizers. You might have heard that phosphorus promotes flowering. That's only kind of true. Plants absolutely need phosphorus for flowering. That's true. But the thing is that once you get past this teeny little amount, you just don't need any more for flowering. I mean, people look at the NPK and they think, well, phosphorus, you must need a huge amount of it, almost as much as nitrogen. If you look at the foliar analysis, what the amount of different elements in a plant, besides carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, the number one is nitrogen. After that, it's potassium. And after that, it's not phosphorus. It's usually sulfur, calcium, magnesium. Phosphorus is usually number 5 or 6 down the list. Phosphorus, you absolutely need it, but it is not needed in these huge quantities. Something like a 6-2-1 is going to be a better choice. If you're using 10-10-10, that's 1980s. That's what we did in the 80s before we understood all this. In fact, it's more like 70s, but all right. Now, along the way, as we're talking about soils and what we need to make soils better to grow, along the way, we started talking also about pests. When Sir Albert Howard was talking about pests, he was talking about making plants grow better so that they could almost outgrow pest infestations. But certainly people still wanted to put something onto plants to get rid of any insects that would get on them. In the 1800s, most of your pesticides were what we consider organic. And when I say what we consider organic, I'm not talking about carbon. This is where the whole organic thing starts to get fuzzy. A lot of the pesticides used for organic agriculture are actually inorganic. And this is a common one. And by inorganic, I mean doesn't include carbon in it. This is Paris green. Paris green is a paint which, well, let me put it this way. You guys might remember the 1970s, lead-based paints were really, really considered terrible. And lead-based paints were considered terrible because that, if kids ate any of that paint, which kids will sometimes do, that lead would affect their brains and cause real problems. Well, back in the old days with these arsenical paints, the kid would eat the paint and the kid would just die. And they figured, hey, if it works on kids, how about insects? So these old paints, like Paris green, I don't have the can here, but London purple was another one. These old paints were actually used to spray onto plants. And guess what? The arsenic in them would kill all the insects. Lead arsenate, yeah, you heard that right, lead arsenate, was considered an organic pesticide, an organic insecticide up through the 1980s when they stopped using it for what I hope are really obvious reasons. I hope you notice that the Paris green does come from Sherwin-Williams, and I thought that I'd show you a Sherwin-Williams ad from 1914. Or I'm sorry, 1914. This Sherwin-Williams ad from 1914 shows you your dry powdered arsenate of lead. It's all poison. You pay for no water. Very exciting. Then you've got your dry powdered fungi Bordeaux, which, if you don't know what Bordeaux mix is, it includes copper sulfate. So you got plenty of copper there. And then you've got your dry powdered tuber tonic, which includes lead arsenate and copper all in one convenient little box. I mean, isn't that amazing? Isn't that what you want to put on your plants? And believe it or not, that was considered organic. I mean, not organic in the carbon sense, but organic in the agriculture sense. Wow, right? Anyway, and then, you know something? The emblem that they used back then, you see in the lower left-hand corner of the ad, they still use that today. Cover the earth. Yeah, that's what I want to cover the earth with. Copper, lead, and arsenic. Warms my heart. Okay. Then along came Rachel Carson, 1962, Silent Spring. And Rachel Carson's one of my heroes. And in Silent Spring, she basically says, hey, you dummies, stop using this stuff. She was talking about mostly about DDT. DDT came around by 1939, by the way. But she's talking mostly about DDT, but she was also talking about lead arsenate and a few others that she picked out. Mostly they were DDT relatives at that period in time. These are, by the way, called chlorinated hydrocarbon insecticides. And chlorinated hydrocarbon insecticides really dominated the scene until the early 1970s, late 1960s, early 1970s, when we developed some others that I might talk about later. We'll see. Okay, so Rachel Carson, boom. We're using some bad stuff. So what can we do? Well, she suggested that we start using some natural compounds and said that some of these natural compounds might be better. Okay. How about that? Well, what is an organic pesticide? Okay, and by an organic pesticide, again, I want to be very specific. We are not talking about carbon. An organic pesticide, I'm talking about classified as organic by organic growers, okay? Organic has now grown to mean something brand new. It means natural. And what kind of compounds might these include? They might include a botanical. For example, pyrethrum comes from a type of chrysanthemum. We might mean inorganics. And by inorganics, I'll give you a simple example. What about something like sodium chloride? Okay, regular table salt. Sodium chloride can be used as an herbicide. Okay, and that would be considered an organic pesticide. And just like synthetics, an organic pesticide inhibits the growth and or development of a pest. I mean, that's what a pesticide is. Affects the growth or development of a pest. Why do we care if a pesticide is organic? Why can they sell us these organic pesticides and we buy them? Well, in the case of a producer, to produce a premium for the goods. And most importantly, to avoid contaminating the environment and ourselves with potentially damaging substances. But do these pesticides offer the safety that we're looking for? And I guess what I'm actually asking is there really this dichotomy where an organic pesticide is safe and a pesticide that's not organic is dangerous? Is that the truth? Just as a side note here, rattlesnake bite, perfectly natural. How safe is that? And now you know where the rest of this talk is going. Except that I'm having trouble advancing the slide. There it goes. All right. Not all organic pesticides are great. Let's just start with that. And we'll start with acute toxicity. So I tried to make this easy. Look at the pink. Pink means synthetic. Look at the green. Green means organic. I have this more or less listed. In fact, I have it listed in order of toxicity. And as you can see, while my most toxic one is a synthetic, next in line is an organic, then a synthetic, then an organic, then a synthetic, then an I might have done that on purpose. My point is, you cannot predict the toxicity of a pesticide based on whether it's organic or synthetic. Okay, you can't. What about chronic toxicity? In other words, you're exposed to the pesticide for a long period of time. Can you predict, is a natural pesticide necessarily less chronically toxic than is a synthetic pesticide necessarily more toxic chronically than an organic? Once again, no. You have no way of predicting whether a pesticide is more or less toxic based on the fact that it's organic. You just can't do it. Toxicity to non-target organisms, guess what? Same thing. You simply cannot predict how bad a pesticide is going to affect the environment based on whether it's organic or synthetic. This is all very simple. Now, somebody out there, a guy named Joe Kovach, in the early 90s, came up with something called EIQ, Environmental Impact Quotient. And what he did was look at different pesticides and actually gave them a numeric value. And this numeric value represented how bad that pesticide was for both us and the environment. The bigger the number, the worse, okay? So instead of talking about acute, chronic, and environmental, we can smush them all together. We can get one number and we can figure out which pesticides are better and worse. And guess what? You can't predict how safe or what the environmental impact quotient of a pesticide is based on whether it's organic or synthetic. You can't do it. Now, this is what I think is interesting. The other stuff you might have been able to predict. This one is tougher. And this one is based on a paper put out a few years ago, is looking at controlling disease in apple trees in Pennsylvania. And by the way, I'm from Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia area. I grew up on an orchard, and I can tell you that these numbers are real. And by the way, there's no numbers there yet. I'm going to show you the numbers in a second. The numbers here add up all the applications that you would use of the different compounds that you need to control disease on apple trees. To control diseases on apple trees organically, you need to use copper hydroxide and sulfur, okay? Multiple times a year. We'll talk about that in a second. Or if you're using a synthetic, you can use Maneb a couple of times a year. All right, now, I'm showing you the single-use EIQ, but now I want to show you the EIQ that they have when we take into account all the applications you need to make. And I would like you to remember that when you're using organics, typically you have to use more. Let's take a look at the numbers. Field use EIQ for the copper hydroxide is going to be 46.6. Field use EIQ for the sulfur is going to be 713.7. You have to use that much of it. You can add these together and come up with about 750, more or less. Well, 760. Or we could use Maneb. Maneb sounds scary. I will give you that. What is our field use EIQ for Maneb? 20.6. So let's see. We go organic, and we have 760, or we go synthetic and we use 20.6. I know that copper hydroxide and sulfur sounds better, but you've got to use so much of that to control disease that you end up adding enough copper to almost sterilize the ground after about 10 years. How do I know this? Because they did it in California. If you're in California and you're on an organic orchard, your ground is going to have significantly less worms, significantly less bacteria, because you've added so much copper to control the disease. People should do what they feel comfortable doing. For my money, I'm going to go with synthetic in this particular situation. The Dirty Dozen. You guys have probably seen the Dirty Dozen. That's the fruits and vegetables that people say that you should buy organic because it has all the synthetic residue. You know what the federal government doesn't do? They don't test the residue of organic pesticides. If you don't test the residue of organic pesticides, then how can you make a fair comparison? Newsflash, you can't. The Dirty Dozen is one of the stupidest lists out there. I will always give you my opinion. Okay, weed control. Let's talk about actual stuff now because I'm done preaching. My time as a minister is over. Weed control. What are the best methods of weed control? If you must control weeds, the smartest choice is always to hand weed. And the smartest choice is to hand weed simply because you get exercise, you get to see your crop, and most of all, is there anything better than the satisfaction of grabbing a weed and pulling out the entire taproot? Come on. Does anything feel better? You know nothing feels better. That is why you should hand weed. Next to that, of course, is mulching. Mulching is a fantastic method for controlling emerging weeds. There are all kinds of great mulches out there. Two that I'll plug because I personally like them, and I'm not knocking any others. I like pine bark chips. They just work for me great. And another one is straw. Straw tends to be very cheap and be very effective. Don't get hay. Hay is a mess. I have known people to put down hay instead of straw. That's a mistake. You want straw without the seed heads for what I hope are really obvious reasons, because you don't want a crop of hay in the middle of your tomatoes. I am a big proponent of no-till gardening. Lee Reich's book, Weed-Free Gardening, is what I recommend if you're interested in no-till gardening. Lee Reich, brilliant guy, and that book is wonderful, provides all kinds of resources. All right, there are a lot of other organic choices though, things like corn gluten meal, which is a pre-emergence herbicide for stopping weeds before they come up. You've got contact herbicides like fire, vinegar, clove oil, garlic oil, and citric acid. And you've got not quite organic iron, HEDTA. I'm going to talk about some of these in more detail. The ones I don't talk about in more detail are garlic oil, clove oil, and citric acid. Look, these contact herbicides are all contact herbicides. And what do I mean by that? We have some great natural compounds which will burn the top of a plant. What we don't have are natural substances which will kill the plant at the root. There are a lot of these things that I can spray on a plant and have it look really nasty, really, really fast, but it usually won't kill the whole plant. An exception is iron HEDTA. This is an iron chelate, if you know what an iron chelate is. Basically, that means it overloads the plant with iron, and it can kill it. It will also make big green patches all over your lawn, just like dog spots, because most of your grass is somewhat deficient in iron, so it makes these big green spots. But it works, and it's just overdosing them on iron. It'll also kill slugs. Slugs overdose on iron too. All right, turf herbicides. Corn gluten meal is great. I really like corn gluten meal, but you've got to apply a lot of it. You've got to apply about 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet, which is a lot, okay? It's a lot of corn gluten meal. But it does fertilize the area really, really well. So it's offering nitrogen as well as controlling weeds. But here's the thing. If you want a perfectly weed-free lawn, corn gluten meal is not going to do it for you. Corn gluten meal is also not going to kill anything that has already emerged. It's only going to take care of stuff that is still a seed. But it is going to be about, and the number is 80% effective. 80% isn't bad. But if you're somebody who really, really wants no clover in your lawn, which that's crazy. Don't want no. Clover is wonderful in your lawn. You should have clover in your lawn. But if you wanted no clover in your lawn, this is not going to do it for you. Okay. I like corn gluten meal, but it is not going to give you a pristine lawn. Over on the far right, that is the iron HEDTA that I was talking about, that Whitney Farms product. And that Whitney Farms product basically overdoses your dicots like dandelion on iron, killing them. And like I said, it fertilizes the nearby grass too, and they'll get and that grass will get very, very green, which may be good, may be bad, depending on what you're looking for. Now we're going to talk about fire, and fire's just fun. I hope at least some of you have tried fire before. It is entertaining. But let's take a look. I'm going to show you my experience with fire. So here we go. You've probably seen these before. A propane torch for killing weeds. So I took this propane torch and I lit the end. You can see it right there. Immediately after doing that, I swept back and forth. One of the mistakes that people make with these is they like keep the torch aimed at one area and don't move it. You move back and forth at about the same speed as if you were spraying something. This is where I burned all the hair off of my finger, because that's what happens when you play with fire. And this is the area 3 days after I hit it. Check it out. I mean, I cleared that area. This is that area 2 weeks later, because fire, like vinegar and so many other things that I showed you, is a contact herbicide. In other words, it kills what it touches, but that's all it really kills, okay? If you want it to go deep in the soil, you're going to be keeping that fire on one spot for a long, long time, because the top 2 inches of soil, those are an incredible insulator. And if you don't keep that fire on the top level of soil for a long, long time, it's not going to work. In other words, for most purposes, fire is not going to be very effective unless you get the plant while it's very, very young. If you get the plant while it's young, that's a different deal entirely. But now, vinegar versus Roundup. We know we have a lot of people who think that vinegar can compete with Roundup. So I want to show you a little side-by-side test of vinegar versus Roundup that I did a couple of years ago. So here we go. Roundup after 3 days. Pretty good burn down. Cleaned up the area pretty well. Vinegar. This is just regular household vinegar. Regular household vinegar is about 5% acetic acid, more or less, depends on the vinegar, but roughly 5% acetic acid. Check it out. Burnt it down pretty well. So then you ask yourself, what happens after 3 weeks? Well, that's Roundup after 3 weeks, and got to tell you, that looks pretty darn good. Now, what about household vinegar after 3 weeks? Oh my goodness. Everything grew back. Why? Because vinegar is a contact herbicide. We burned the top, but everything came right on back on us, because that's what happens with a contact herbicide. It comes back. I did want to point out that after 5 weeks, we did have some stuff coming back with the Roundup. And why was that? It's not because of the roots. This is because there were seeds, and Roundup does not kill seeds. It is not a pre-emergent. Okay, so any seeds that were in the ground did germinate. Hit it again and you'll get rid of those, and there'll be even less seeds in the ground. But Roundup is a post-emerge product with almost no pre-emergent properties. Okay, so now you've seen vinegar versus Roundup, but there is one vinegar that is tougher than all the rest, and that is horticultural vinegar, which you may have heard of. This is 20% acetic acid. Oh my goodness, 20% acetic acid. I got this stuff and I was excited because I knew this was going to kill some stuff. So the first thing that I did was I unscrewed the top and I sniffed it, because I'm really, really stupid. And you know what happened? Hair literally fell out of my nose. So I think you should be very careful about sniffing horticultural vinegar. But I was excited to try this stuff. So after sniffing it, recovering, putting a Q-tip in my nose, clearing it all out, I screwed the squirt top back on, and I went out to my back porch. Now, at the time, I was in a split level house, and I had this upper porch, and below it, I had this lower area, which was gravel. Okay, it was big enough to walk under. It was a raised porch, and it was big enough to walk under. And in this gravel area, there were a bunch of weeds growing. And I thought to myself, you know what? This would be a great place for me to just try out this horticultural vinegar. So I'm going to spray this horticultural vinegar underneath the porch. So I sprayed the horticultural vinegar underneath the porch, and out of a corner of my eye, I saw something hopping. And all of a sudden, I realized, oh my goodness, I just accidentally sprayed a frog. Frog was just kind of laying there. And hey, I've sprayed frogs with Roundup before. And if you spray a frog with Roundup, it's not good for the frog. But if you wash the frog off with water, it's going to be fine. As long as you do it, you know, within a minute, you're fine. So I called up to my wife. The porch came out from the kitchen. So my wife, Suzanne, was up in the kitchen. So I said, Suzanne, I just sprayed this poor frog with horticultural vinegar. I need to clean him off. Could you get me a bowl of water? Less than 60 seconds, less than 30 seconds. She comes out with a bowl of water. I washed the frog off. It was too late. The vinegar had killed the frog. Horticultural vinegar is dangerous. On the label, it actually says danger. If horticultural vinegar gets into your eye, it will etch your cornea. In fact, one picture that I wish I had, which I didn't take, is if you look at this poor frog's eye, you can actually see where they were clouded over from getting vinegar into it. Vinegar is a dangerous substance to use. I know it doesn't seem that way. I love my vinegar potato chips too. But that doesn't mean that it's safe. That doesn't mean you can just release it on the environment. Vinegar is bad for most aquatics. Do not play with this stuff. It is not safe. All right, now we're going to switch to disease control. Smartest organic choices, removing diseased material, and proper water and fertility. You know, the biggest issue, running a botanical garden, I have a lot of people come in and have problems with their plants. And you know the problem that I see most? Loving their plants to death. What happens? Well, they simply water the plants every single day. And you know the worst thing that you can do to, say, an orchid, and we have a great orchid collection here, by the way, your orchids don't want to be watered every single day. That is a great way to kill them. But people want to do what's right by their plants, and they love them to death. So be careful. Don't overwater, proper water and fertility, and keep diseased material away. Having said that, there are other organic disease controls that people like to use. And I thought I'd give you some examples. You've probably seen milk, baking soda, copper sprays, and sulfur. We talked about copper sprays and sulfur sprays before in the context of apples and controlling disease on apples. But what about using them for something like black spot on rose? They absolutely can be effective. Okay, so here's chlorothalonil. So this is what we call a positive control. This is a synthetic pesticide that is very effective. This is the end of a season. These are roses. The chlorothalonil worked very, very well, protecting the roses from black spot. All right, now what about Cornell mix, baking soda, oil, and soap? That did not help very much controlling black spot. In fact, it helped almost not at all. Bordeaux mix. Bordeaux mix is copper sulfate and lime. It was first tried in the 1860s. It was actually originally used to repel people because it's got this nasty hue to it. And they sprayed it on grapes in France. And people wouldn't eat the grapes. But it also protected from downy mildew. So they figured out that it was a fungicide. Okay. It is organic. But it has some major problems because it's copper sulfate and copper builds up in the soil. So Bordeaux mix generally isn't considered the healthiest thing to add, even though it's considered organic, because you're adding all this copper to your soil, which is very toxic to your microorganisms. They talk about Roundup being toxic to microorganisms, and it is to some extent. Try Bordeaux mix. That'll just sterilize your soil. But check out the roses. All in all, Bordeaux mix did a pretty good job of keeping black spot away. Now, having said that, It is not something that I would apply 30 or 40 times a year. It's something that you apply once, maybe twice a year. If you're applying it more than that, you're going to slowly poison your ground. There's no way that you can. What happens to copper when it hits the soil? It's not very mobile in the soil. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't break down. It's copper. It's going to stay there, and it's going to create problems. So this is something to use once in a while. Sulfur has been used since Roman times, and sulfur worked pretty well for us. Sulfur is, if you're going to use, if you have a choice, copper sulfate versus sulfur, I'd go with sulfur. It is a little bit safer for humans and a little bit safer for your soil. It will acidify your soil over time. What about milk? Milk is one that I read about that I was like, no way this stuff could possibly work. But let me tell you something. Milk works okay. It has something called lactoferrin in it. Lactoferrin is an antifungal, and milk actually works pretty darn well. We used a mix of 1 part milk to 2 parts water, and we sprayed it out, mostly after rain, and milk did a pretty good job of controlling black spot. So we were happy with it. And you're asking what type of milk? We used whole milk, but there's been research on all different types of milk, everything from powdered milk to skim milk to 1% milk, and it all seems to work relatively well. All right, now let's talk about insect control. The best insect control is, of course, hand squishing. And I mean, look, if you get the satisfaction pulling a weed out of the ground to get into the taproot, then why wouldn't you get the same satisfaction squishing insects? Right? Right. Hand squishing, water streams, those work great. Encouraging lady beetles and other beneficials to visit the gardens is a great idea. Double flowers, by the way, do not attract them. But if you want a single plant, which does a great job, I'll give you 2. Fennel is 1. And if you want a native, just because you feel like planting a native for some reason, mountain mint. Now, having said mountain mint, it's a native, so I'm not supposed to call it invasive, but boy, you got to keep mountain mint under control. But that will bring in a lot of beneficial insects. Okay. What about releasing beneficial insects? Waste of your time. Do not bother adding beneficials. They're going to fly away. It's just a fact. And you say, well, what about these lady beetles that say they won't fly away? They're going to fly away. It's just what they do. It's the way they're programmed. So make a garden that's attractive to beneficials. Don't bother adding beneficials unless it's fun. It's fun for you. Fine, go ahead. But don't expect adding beneficials to actually be helpful. It's not going to be. Other insect controls, bagging fruit. I have a whole list of insecticides here. I'm actually not going to go through them. By and large, if you are going with a spray, you're generally going to be as safe going with a synthetic as an organic. If you would like me to pick out 1 or 2 safer organics, I'm happy to do that. But please understand that there are plenty of safe synthetics also. But I'll pick out a safe one here. BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. It kills only what it's targeted towards, generally targeted towards caterpillars. And it works great because it doesn't kill anything else. I do think BT is a wonderful insecticide because of that. And soap is certainly a good insecticide. By the way, although soap is considered organic, it's usually made synthetically, but whatever. Bagging fruit, though, is a big one, and I'll show you that right here. Here I have a bag put over a tomato. By and large, that will protect that tomato from just about anything, with the exception of deer. Deer will actually use that bag as a way to suck the juice out of the tomato and leave all the skin behind. And that is what you see right there. And that, by the way, is the top of the porch that I was talking about before, where we used to live. So the deer literally sucked the juice out of that tomato. But by and large, these bags, they're also called Japanese fruit bags, do a tremendous job of protecting apples, peaches, tomatoes from insect attack. They do a great job. Now, are they a lot of work? Sure, they're a lot of work. Real organic growing where you're not spraying stuff all over the place, is a lot of work. End of story. I have seen one case where a bag didn't work, and that's this right here. This is actually a bird came by and pecked through the bag. So that was a problem. And then I want to show you Remay really quick. This is a row cover made of cloth. Believe it or not, the angle makes it looks like it's very dense. This actually allows 90% of sunlight through it. So it's actually allowing most sunlight in there. This type of row cover is very good at excluding insects, and it is certainly something that I recommend and have used and had a lot of success with. Traps can be useful. Just to point out two here, in the upper left, you'll see the lad trap. That is for controlling apple maggot. It can be very effective if you use a lot of them. And in the lower right, you'll see the Japanese beetle trap. The Japanese beetle trap is a wonderful trap to give to your neighbor. The Japanese beetle trap will attract more insects than it catches. So give it to your neighbor. It'll pull the insects out of your yard. That's a win-win. All right. And with that, know what you're applying, know why you're applying it, know what other effects the application is going to have. No chemicals, organic or synthetic, are all good or all bad. It's up to us to use them properly. That said, Grace, I think it's time for you to come on and go through the questions, and I'll answer what I can. And what I can't, hey, you're an extension agent, so it's up to you.
That's fine. Thank you so much, Jeff. This was fantastic. I learned a lot. I really appreciate you coming on. I have a question before we go through the chat, and it's about guano. So, guano is aged bat poop, but
or bird poop.
Or bird poop. But how can that be safe? And from like a food safety perspective, how aged does it have to be for it to be safe to put in our garden? And like I am picturing somebody going, oh well, I have bats in my barn and I can just scoop that out, and I know that that's a health issue. So like what is the safe way to do that?
The thing about buying guano versus getting it, you shouldn't get it from your barn. But the thing about buying it is that it's been composted. Normally, naturally, the compost is going to run. I mean, this is a hot compost when it has a lot of guano because of the amount of nitrogen. So that's pretty safe. When you're getting it out of your attic, the problem is that certainly you're getting some guano, but you're also going to be getting some fresh poop. And the fresh poop is what we're concerned about. Having said that, if you don't know what you're doing, ignore what I'm about to say. But if you know what you're doing and you're running a hot compost pile, you could add the guano to a hot compost pile and you would be okay. I would not use it fresh.
Yeah, we have, for context, rules. These aren't rules that home gardeners have to abide by, but commercial producers, I think it's 140 days for FSMA, 140 days from the time that you harvest the food. 140 days back from that is the last time you're allowed to apply any kind of animal product, manure, or compost, because you're worried about things being fully composted and coming in contact with edible parts of the plant. So like I have chickens and I am bad at composting. So I just, I add, when I pull my stuff out in the fall, I add my chicken stuff, and then that's the bed that I plant in the spring. I don't put my overwintering stuff in that bed because I'm bad at composting and I don't want to take any risk. So yeah, I was like, oh gosh, that feels like a safety issue. It
is a safety issue.
It is, and it's something that I think a lot of times we forget as home gardeners, is that there are food safety risks in the home garden. And it's not necessarily coming from what we think. Like a lot of times we have gardeners who are like, well, I'm organic, and so I don't have to.
And this is the fundamental problem. And this is the fundamental problem with compost tea, which we're not going to talk about today, because I actually have an hour-long talk about why compost tea is about the stupidest thing that you can use. So, anyway.
I love that. You'll have to come back. I have got some questions about neem oil. And so a couple of people have asked, can you share your experience with neem oil, if it's safe and stuff like that?
Neem oil is not safe. It's certainly far from the neem oil is a vasoconstrictor. And I have utilized it in experimentally for both insects and for disease. Against disease, it's completely ineffective, or close enough to completely ineffective that it might as well be completely ineffective. And against insects, it is only marginally effective. I've found horticultural oil to be more effective. With any pesticide, the whole key is efficacy, how well it does its job, versus safety, how safe it is for you to use. Neem has a very bad efficacy versus safety rate. If you're going to use neem oil, use horticultural oil. It's simply safer for the effect you get. I have tried it. I have not found it to be effective. I do not recommend anybody use it. I recommend synthetics before I recommend that. There are a lot of synthetic. There are a lot of organics I recommend. Don't use neem. It doesn't make sense in almost no situation.
There's so for example, like a lot of times we recommend using horticultural oil or dormant oil in especially tree fruit production, and it's backyard fruit production to control scales and crawlers and stuff like that. And there's an excellent use of horticultural oil. Neem oil is not a replacement. So that does different things. And the other thing, I've answered a couple of questions in the comments. Safety is in Virginia, the label is the law. And we have when you buy something at like a big box store, like if you go out and you buy like neem oil at a big box store, there's legally has to be a label on there that talks about the LD50s that Jeff talked about earlier and a bunch of other stuff in there. But it also has application rates and risks and PPE requirements. And so if you're concerned about safety, no matter what you're applying, you should be always wearing proper PPE. And so that means that if you're applying glyphosate or if you're applying horticultural vinegar or if you're applying whatever you're applying to your garden, you have to be wearing proper PPE so you are protected, because the safety of that product is evaluated while wearing PPE, the safety for you. So it's not like, oh, this is safe and then it's safer if I put those gloves on or wear those goggles or wear that mask. It's that amount of safe when you're following the label, which requires the PPE. So there's a lot of cases of pesticide poisoning and illness and issues, and it's because they don't wear proper PPE. I've seen all kinds of things as an agent. Don't be that person. Read the label before you buy it. Don't be afraid to pull that label in the box store before you buy it. Make sure you're comfortable with the conditions under which you should be applying that. That's my soapbox, but you should like that. That's really, really important. And I have also seen some interesting questions about fennel, which is a new thing to me. I grow fennel in my garden and I have never had issues with it interacting with other plants, but apparently my EMGs have. So I've had people asking about fennel as a control measure or a pollinator species. Where did you recommend?
So fennel, right. So fennel has, the reason fennel is effective, I've never had any problem with fennel doing anything except in some cases being a little bit aggressive, but a lot of plants are a little aggressive. Boy, try that mountain mint. You'll see an aggressive plant. So fennel has a ton of nectaries on it, which are very attractive to many of your parasitoid wasps, your ichneumonids, your braconids. So it tends to bring in a wide assortment of insects that are going to help you control your pests. They come in to get the nectar, and then they stay to lay their babies inside unfortunate other insects. So that's why fennel is an effective thing. For what it's worth, fennel isn't native, but I am not a strict native person in any sense. Some of the native stuff goes way too far. So one thing though to be certain of is doubles. Watch out for doubles. Doubles are gorgeous, but doubles do not have pollen, generally speaking, and they have reduced nectaries. So when you're planting a double flower, you are actually planting a plant which is incapable of supporting beneficial insects. People don't realize this, but double flowers can't support beneficial insects. So generally speaking, you should stay away from doubles. Besides that, I mean, you guys realize that since it doubles, that's basically the stamen has been mutated to form a petal. That's what a double is. The stamen, the male part of the flower, has been mutated to form a petal. So like a double rose, if somebody gives you a double rose, which happens every Valentine's Day, or you receive a double rose, do you realize what you're getting or receiving? You're actually getting an amputated, mutated, castrated sex organ. And is that really something that you want to be sharing with somebody that you love? Anyway, okay.
We have some other questions about treated fence posts around an organic garden. And so
that is a really good question.
Yeah,
that is
so
an excellent question.
And I think that I want you to also explain the difference between like certified organic and what the rules would be there versus like organic for a home garden.
All right. So first of all, with treated posts, this is a big deal. Before about 2006, posts were treated with stuff that can get into the soil and create real problems, arsenicals, that can actually leach into the soil. So posts pre-2006, I do not recommend any vegetable garden be anything. In fact, let's make it 2010 just to be safe. I do not recommend any vegetable garden be planted with that type of post. Now, posts after that, because of this, were made in a way that you don't have toxic leachate. So new posts, you're good to go. Old posts, do not utilize, okay, for something like a vegetable garden. They are potentially dangerous. In terms of certified organic, you're really getting into a mess there. So first of all, there's no certified organic for the home gardener. You can do whatever you want and call it whatever you want. Do whatever you want. Certified organic, a lot of people don't understand the rules. Let me just say this about certified organic. It's a mess. And it's a mess because if somebody wants to cheat, cheating is the easiest thing in the world. Let's say I'm growing organically right now. I just made my whole 10 acres out here. I just made it into an organic farm. First of all, is the USDA checking it? No, the USDA contracts it out to a private company. That private company then may be really good or may be really bad. Now, if it's really bad, how often do they have to check it? Once a year. Do they have to walk? No. All they have to do is come to me and say, hey, can you show me your pesticide records? Yeah, here's my pesticide records. Oh my goodness, you did exactly what you should do. You're good. And then he leaves and he comes back next year. And they're not checking me for synthetic pesticides. They're not checking me for organic pesticides. They're not checking me for anything. Organic certification is as good as the honesty of the people who are doing the organic growing. End of story.
I also want to say if you're like, oh, I really organic, and at least my concept of organic is really important to me when I'm consuming, the certification that I look for is certified naturally grown, because in Virginia, at least, certified naturally grown or CNG, farmers are inspected by peer farmers. So they're inspected by another certified naturally grown farmer, not by, and also that's a much more accessible certification for smaller producers because organic certification costs thousands of dollars. And so if you're shopping, especially if you're shopping locally or shopping at farmers markets and you're worried about that, do certified naturally grown or CNG, because they're slightly more accountable in that way, or grow your own stuff, and always wash your produce. We got a question about spruce weed killer. And I have been doing some Googling and I have yet to find the label for that. I'm on their website and I don't see a label.
This is something.
Claims. Do you know anything?
Do you know the
about
compound?
it?
Do you know the compound?
I can't find it. I'm looking.
I do not know what this is. If I don't know, I'm not going to comment. You know,
That's
so many of
fine.
these things, so many of these things, I've spent a lot of time with neem. Hey, I only talk about neem because I've spent dozens and dozens, maybe over 100 hours dealing with neem at one level or another. I feel comfortable talking about neem. If I don't know something, I'm not gonna talk about it.
That's fine. I will ask one of our weed scientists if they've seen it because I'm sure it'll come up. I don't see their active ingredient. So that's okay. I yeah. Lynn says is there, they want to use it on the organic section of the community garden. And I hate weeding grass, but I don't know. I don't see enough information on it and I don't see the label. I was unable to find the label online, which is not a good sign. Because you can find the label for Lysol online. So I would look for um it lists a bunch of like oils and stuff. So I'll look into it and get back to you guys. Spruce, writing it down, spruce weed killer. Additionally, um, we had a question about, oh my gosh, a row cover and pollinators. And so, the
That
question, does the row cover exclude pollinators? And the answer is
yes,
yes, but what are
that is
some
a
workarounds?
that is it, right. So that's a big deal. If you have something that needs to be pollinated, you can either do it by hand with a paintbrush, or usually your row covers are something, or often your row covers are something that you can remove after the plants are less sensitive, after they gain some size, and then potentially recover. So you just have to look at your crop and figure out what's appropriate. That's a crop by crop basis.
Yep. Yep. So some things need pollination, some things don't need pollination. Um, Sometimes row cover is like the best pest control that you can have.
And
And
sometimes it does exclude. So you need to look it up.
yeah.
This isn't, you can't just assume.
Yeah. So for example, like allium leaf miner, which is one of the pests that I study, um, there's things that work to kill it, to spray it conventionally. For organic growers, you have like one good, in Virginia, we grow 2 rounds of onions a year. And so you basically get one application per season of that effective spray. And for all of the volunteers on the call who are vegetable gardeners, the best control method for that, above actually spraying, even, is row covers, covering your onions, effectively covering and sealing off your onions because they don't need to be pollinated, right? So that covers do phenomenal. They're a better, higher control rate than spraying for the pest and significantly cheaper. The problem is if you get a hole in your row cover or something like that, you have to stay on top of it to kind of patch it up. The other downside is that row covers hold moisture in your plants. And if you have problems with rot in your onions, row covers are not a good option because you will have more issues with that because they retain moisture and produce a better environment for that. Not as bad as some other things, but airflow is really important for drying things out entirely and letting them, not get all fungusy. There's another question about specifically referencing Silent Spring and Rachel Carson, and I'll read it. One of Rachel Carson's concerns was persistence of the pesticide in the environment. Some things break down very slowly. On balance, is it better to use a small amount of a pesticide that breaks down slowly, or practically not at all, than a pesticide that breaks down quickly, but we're applying a lot more of it? Or is that
It's,
it depends.
it's that depends so much. Rachel Carson was dealing mostly with again, the chlorinated hydrocarbons, and those in lead arsenate. I mean, you can't pick anything that lasts longer than that. There's still places in Virginia, as a matter of fact, where you can't grow apples because of the amount of lead arsenate in the soil. So this is totally case by case. Unless I know the specific pesticides, I won't answer that question.
That's fair. That's fair. I don't see any
I saw
new.
one thing.
Go
I
ahead.
skipped I skipped to the end here, and I did see the ingredients
Oh
for the
yeah.
spruce oil. Sodium lauryl sulfate. That, by the way, is basically soap.
Yep.
Geraniol, which is, this is basically the same as a vinegar. It is a contact killer. It looks like it's going to be a very good contact killer, but it is a contact killer, meaning things should still come up from the roots. I have not tried it. Because I haven't tried it, I don't want to pretend that I'm talking definitively, but this has all the earmarks of a typical effective contact killer, which will certainly kill a young plant. But if you put this on a dandelion, the dandelion will look dead for 3 days and then right back up.
Yeah, the sodium lauryl sulfate is so like Jeff said, a soap or a surfactant, and so it makes the plant better absorb the oils into the leaves, because sometimes the waxy surface of the leaves really resists penetration. So that a lot of times those surfactants are actually added. If they're not in the formulation of the herbicide, they're added in the tank mixture in commercial settings to have more efficacy. Question. Can you test lead, copper, leftovers in the ground? Um,
Sure.
I have an old farm and things never grow here. Uh, so in there, so there's a way to test your water through VCE. We've got a household water quality program that tests for those things. The um,
You guys have a soils lab, right?
but our soils lab is only nutrition. So our soils lab does not test for
They won't do okay.
no, it's not, it's
You
no
might
contamination. So there are
you
like
might
two
have to
different
go
ways.
you might have to go out of state. You
Or private is
if you
usually what we recommend.
if you're doing it here, we would have to ask for special test and we'd have to pay for it. But there are absolutely labs that will test for those things for a price, and I think the price would be about $20.
Yeah, we have our soil lab. A lot of people will like send things and think that it will test, but we don't test for any kind of contaminants in our soil lab. It's just basically for growing recommendations. There is um but what Jeff said about orchards, there is was a lot of lead and arsenic and things like that sprayed in orchards in Virginia. Primarily the regions that we have a concern of are the mountain regions, not the coastal regions for that. Now, apples were grown all over Virginia, but the ones that have been in orchard for the longest are going to be things west of the 95 corridor in Virginia. Yeah, I would send to a private lab to test for that, or send to an out-of-state lab to test for that. But something else is that you need to check is like what is growing, what isn't growing. Make sure you like when you talk to somebody about your soil test results for contamination that you include what is and what is not growing, because sometimes that like some things, like if you've got a black walnut tree nearby, some things are very susceptible to the allele chemicals that they submit, and some things are not. And so some things might perform well while others might be like stunted and have a lot of issues. I want to ask one more question, and it's because I don't know what it is. Um, somebody says that they use worm tea. What is worm tea?
Compost tea. I love worm tea. It's a totally different beast than compost tea. Um, you have to be careful, but contaminants are much less likely in a vermicompost. Not impossible, but less likely. If you're concerned about it, and I don't blame you for being concerned about it, you can always heat it. What you're basically doing with vermicompost is the worms are eating food and breaking it down very effectively. making nutrients much more available. And shoot, I've used it, I've tested it, I love it. Great, great way to do compost. I'm all about vermicompost.
Awesome. If you guys are super, super interested in vermicomposting, the Chesterfield EMG unit actually does a vermicomposting project and have an agent there that's really geeked out about it. So if you as volunteers want to interact with some other volunteers that do that, get in touch with Chesterfield because they definitely have a whole thing going on. Okay, with that, it is time to end and get on with our day. But I so much appreciate you, Jeff, for getting on and talking with us and sharing your knowledge with us. Oh, Central Shenandoah Valley Master Gardeners have vermiculture too. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you. Everybody say thank you to Jeff. And the recording will be up in about a week or so. Awesome.
Thank
you
you all
guys.
very much. Appreciate being invited.
Oh, also, Heart of Virginia Master Gardeners will host vermicomposting on 7/24/25. So that's next week, guys. Also, check out the biweekly update for those events too. So thank you. Have a good one, guys.